Answer the questions first. Why in some sutra, Pratyeka Buddhas are considered at a lower realm than the Buddha and Bodhisattvas? Remember, they emphasize more on self-enlightenment. By intellectually understanding the 12 links of dependent origination, and by actually practicing meditation to get rid of the ignorance, then gradually and eventually he arrived at a nirvana. A nirvana is a cessation of the 12 links. Nirvana or nirodha, we usually, when we talk about the 12 links of dependent originations, we talk about nirodha, 寂灭, nirodha. So this is through intellectual thinking and self-practice. Instead of the Bodhisattva's ideal of how can I be saved if I don't save all my folks? All my folks' body is the same as my body. In other words, the Bodhisattva extends his compassion to all, not just of his own. It is only through complete compassion without concentration on yourself that you can arrive at complete enlightenment. So the Pratyeka Buddha's enlightenment is enough to get nirodha of the 12 links of dependent origination, but not enough to have the Anuttara Samya Sambodhi. Anuttara Samya Sambodhi is what the Bodhisattvas aim to achieve, is what the Buddha have achieved. But the Pratyeka Buddhas, as long as they arrive at nirodha, the nirvana, at a complete eradication and cessation of the 12 links of dependent origination, they are away from samsara, from the ocean of life and death. No more reincarnations for them. So they are more on a self motive, whereas the Bodhisattva is on an altruistic motive. So that's the difference. But that doesn't mean that the Pratyeka Buddha is lower than a Bodhisattva. It could be considered as lower in the sense of that's only self and not altruistic. But from the perspective of the Pratyeka Buddha, he already have arrived at that destination. From the perspective of, like, I want to learn how to swim and I won't get drowned. Now, if I don't learn how to get to swim, I'll get drowned. So as long as I know how to swim, then I won't get drowned. That's enough. I can arrive at that shore of enlightenment. The Bodhisattvas having a different idea. They want everybody to be away from being drowned. In other words, the Bodhisattva is learning not to be drowned, and at the same time want all the others to learn at the same time. He wants everybody to go to that shore of nirvana, not just for oneself. From the perspective of the Pratyeka Buddha, what's the problem with me? As long as I know how to swim, I'm okay. I'm not committing any errors. Saving others is good, but I may consider myself to be limited in my ability. There's so many reasons for his consideration of being only a Pratyeka Buddha. But at a lower ram, I don't know how you classify a lower ram. He's already nirodha, he's already nirvana, he's already out from reincarnation. But why do we differentiate lower and higher? It's only in your mind. This is lower, this is higher, this is better, this is worse. I mean, if you still discriminate all that, how can you get away from ego? So don't consider the Pratyeka Buddha as lower than the Bodhisattva. Next question. Please explain how a person should act when themselves or someone they care about is threatened with enduring physical violence. You don't need Buddhism to resolve that problem. First of all, you've got to protect yourself to be away from physical violence. You have to get to a safer place. But of course, there's so many reasons why you can't get away. Maybe economically, you depend on that person for a living. And if you get away, you don't have a job, you don't have a house, you don't have any living expenses to depend on, then why don't you encourage yourself to be independent? Why do you want to subject yourself? Now, I'm answering this question from the perspective not of just the Buddhist teaching. I'm answering this question from my common sense. All right? If you are under threat of physical violence, you got to report to the police. And I know that they can jail a husband who beat up his wife for 48 hours. Or a wife beat up the husband. I don't think wife would beat up husband. Usually the husband beat up the wife. It could be vice versa. If you're in Canada, if you are the wife and your husband is beating you up or because he's drunk, report it to the police. And I usually, well, we got a policeman, a retired policeman in here. Usually, the policeman told me that usually they just lock the guy up for 48 hours first before doing anything, because I think they have the right to put him in confinement for 48 hours, not more than 48. Is it more than 48 hours?
48 would be a maximum.
Maximum.
That's the idea, is to get a plan.
And better still, you want to be independent. You want to be away from the physical violence. And I've seen couples that the wife depends on the husband for a living. And why don't you just go out and get a job? Don't depend on him, because he's beating you up all the time. So what for? Don't subject yourself to that. Get a job yourself, and don't emotionally depend on your husband, because as you said, violence only escalates. So that's from my common sense. And from the other hand, though, from a spiritual level, there's so many angles you look at it. And another angle, of course, is the repayment of debt. You beat him up before in your previous life, and that's why he's beating you up now. And you are surprisingly and inexplicably, I don't know how to explain that, you are willing to subject yourself to that. Some people are like that. They have bruises all over the face, and some people ask, "Oh, what happened to you?" "Oh, nothing. I just bumped myself, on a column." Actually, was beaten up by her husband. So, use your common sense. Get away from the physical violence. Be economically dependent. Don't depend on him. There's so many jobs out there. Take a lower paid job, and you don't have to depend on him. Be independent. Build up your confidence, your courage. Always have that confidence that you can look after yourself. You don't have to depend on your partner. But sometimes you got bondage of the children. You don't want to leave the children. So complicated. Marriage is so complicated that nobody wants, some people don't want to get married. It's lots of complications. That's why some people become monks and nuns. They want to lead a simplistic, celibate life. However, if you cannot reserve it mentally, it does not matter whether you're a monk or nun. You always have that bondage with you if you do not have a method to resolve your own internal mental affliction. It will always bind you, wherever you go. Running away from it would not solve the problem. You're running away from it once, you go into another place, you have to solve the same problem. It's in your mind. You will keep on running away. All right, so next question. Could you tell us the name of the document that we review in Dharma talk? I don't know what document you talk about in Dharma. You mean just now? The document? It's called the 12 Links of Dependent Origination. In the Chinese language, it's called 12因缘流转门. The 12 links of dependent originations. So, yeah?
It was a bigger document.
Of course. Oh yes, there's a bigger, it's called Samutpata, I think it's called. You're checking the 12 links of dependent origination, and Google will tell you which sutra you should go to. So many of it. So much literature about the 12 dependent origination. It puts life in very simplistic term and understanding. So we've been talking about this links, 12 links of dependent origination. It provides a detailed description of the problem of suffering and rebirth. Dependent on ignorance, mental formation arises. Depending on mental formation, consciousness arises. So I already explained that. Depending on consciousness, mind and body arises. Depending on mind and body, the six senses arises. Depending on the six senses, contact arises. Depending on the six senses, contact arises. Depending on contact, feeling arises. Depending on feeling, craving arises. Depending on craving, clinging arises. Depending on, which is an attachment, becoming arises. Depending on becoming, birth arises. Depending on birth, aging and death arises. Depending on aging and death, ignorance arises. So this is in a loop. So if we put this into a sequential interpretation, we call it in a time frame. We call it the past life, the present life, and the future life. Now, how do we fit this 12 links of dependent origination? By the way, the 12 links of dependent origination appears in a flow, like a river flow, like a stream of water. And every moment is flowing forward. Our karmic energy is like a river flow. And the Pratyeka Buddha is working backwards to it. In other words, with the complete eradication and cessation of ignorance, reaction ceases. With the complete eradication and cessation of reaction, consciousness ceases. So all these things is going backward. You try to eradicate ignorance, mental formations, consciousness, mind and body, six senses, contact, feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, birth, aging, and death. You work against it. In other words, you want to eradicate, to get rid of all those, to arrive at a nirodha. A nirodha is a cessation. You want to cease, you want to stop the 12 links of dependent origination. So you're moving backwards. Now, this is just an intellectual understanding. How do you practice to move, to eradicate it? How do you practice? How do you practice to eradicate it? Through meditation. Through meditation to, first of all, to put your mind under control. All goes back to the Diamond Sutra. Mental formations, when craving, becoming, and all this occur, that means mental affliction arises. How do you control your mind? So it goes back to what we talk about in the Diamond Sutra. You really have to watch your mind so that you won't create any adverse or non-virtuous or evil mental reaction. You don't habituate your reactions in an evil way, creating evil karma. Even good karma, if you attach to good karma, it is still not pure. So in your meditation, so if you learn this 12 links of dependent origination, and at the same time you learn the Diamond Sutra, you know how to subdue that mind of mental afflictions. You know how to work towards it. Right now you're on the right track. You're doing your meditation. You are putting your mind under control. So we want to put the 12 links of dependent origination in the time frame. We have the past life, present life, and the future life. Past life, ignorance, mental formation represent the conditions that are responsible for the occurrence of this life. Why do we have this life? Because of past life ignorance, because of past life karmic mental formations, because of karmic reactions, karmic speeches, karmic actions that were created in our previous life out of ignorance that we reincarnate into this life. So past life, you can put 2 links in there, ignorance and mental formations. How about present life? Present life, we put 8 links in there. What are these 8 links? Consciousness, name and form, 6 senses, contact, feeling, craving, attachment, and becoming. There's 8. In this present life, why did we get this 8? Consciousness. Remember the alive consciousness zooms into the mom's body because of the fusion of the ovary and the sperm, and then the senses come out, mind and body come out, and then when the baby comes out, it starts to have craving, clinging, attachment, karmic energy all created. He's become an adult, he's involved in karmic energy. All those, what you are doing now, this is your present life. The 8 links explains the present life. And then the future life will have birth, old age, and death belong to the conditions for the future life. Because of what you have done in this life, it also roll you with the karmic energy into next life. You have next life's birth, next life aging, and the next life death. So according to this interpretation, ignorance and mental formation result in the emergence of this life within its psychophysical personality. In turn, the action performed in this life resulted in rebirth in the future life. So this is a loop, a link that is non-ending. We want to cut it. We want to seize it. We want to arrive at nirvana, nirodha, ceasing these 12 links of dependent origination. And you're on the right track. Because why you're coming to build up the wisdom. We're building up the wisdom to get away from ignorance. You're not going to this casino playing games. You're not going to partying. You're not going to, all those other things. You're coming here for an enhancement of wisdom so that you can get away from all these. If you come for the first time, this so far could be your best moment in life. That you start to learn about this. That you know that you should seize all these 12 links of dependent origination. Otherwise, you'll be rolling into it non-stop, non-ending. You're the future Buddha. You can be the Buddha. Don't underestimate yourself. As long as you sow the seeds in there, you are the Buddha. So that's how we put the 12 links of dependent origination into a time frame of the past, the present, and the future. And how do we put it in a cyclical frame? We classified it under 3 aspects. The defilement aspect, the action, defilement, action, and suffering. Now what are defilements? Where do we put the 12 links under defilement? Ignorance, craving, and attachment. All these are defilements. Our ignorance is defilements. Craving for things, desires of things, building up desires, insatiable desires, and attachment of the ego. Ignorance is the main cause of suffering. It is because ignorance that we crave for pleasures of the senses, we crave for existence and for non-existence. We also cling to pleasant experience, to ideas, and most significantly to the idea of an independent and permanent self. We think we have an ego. We want to satisfy this ego. We have been living in a good, comfortable ego zone. If somebody says something bad, then it hurts the ego. We have to habituate ourselves to get away from this in the process of learning, to get away from the 12 links of dependent originations. So ignorance is the cause of actions. Defilement is the impurities of mind resulting in actions. So in defilements, we put in ignorance, craving, and attachment. How about action? The karma created. Mental formation and becoming. These are the actions that you have done. The mental formation, the becoming. Mental formation, of course, refers to the impressions or habits that we have formed in our stream of conscious moments. They are formed by repeated actions, just like the formation of river by repeated flows of water in the stream. In the same way, our actions become habitual. So sometimes we often say that your destiny is your habits. In other words, your habits determine your destiny. You have good habits, you have a good future. In other words, your future is in relationship to your habits. Some people always have the habits of being lazy and not progressing. Then how can you be successful? So if you are always in the habits of hard working and diligence, then you have a high chance of being successful. Some people say, I try all my life and I never become successful. There are other reasons. Being diligent is one way. Do you know how to be diligent? Hardworking. I'm hardworking. How come I never get successful? The cow who's plowing, who's tilling the land is very hardworking. But you have to apply wisdom to your actions of hardworking. That's why we need prajna paramita. So actions, you put mental formations and becoming. Suffering, where do we put the 12 links of dependent origination into? We put consciousness, name, form, 6 senses, contact, feeling, birth, old age, and death. That is suffering. So in other words, those account for the lamentation, sorrow, tribulations, physical and mental sufferings, lots of those. We have to end those suffering by working against this 12 links of dependent origination. Cease it. Practice in order to eradicate all of these. All these links are the effects of defilement and actions. So today, I explained to you the 12 links of dependent origination. I would like you to bring these notes to your home and then you contemplate onto it. Just not, by looking at just the words won't help that much. You have to meditate on it. How do I get ignorance? Where does the ignorance come from? And why do I have this ignorance? What is this ignorance? What would be regarded as ignorant? And then how this ignorance affects my mind? How does this ignorance bring about my existence and lead me into reincarnation? And then you think, oh, this ignorance create all this karmic energy. This karmic energy will create all these tribulations, this effect. And when I die, all this effect don't get disappear. It would carry into my consciousness and carry into my mother's womb in the form of a liar consciousness. That's how I get born. And then when I am in my mother's womb, then I contact with my mom. Then I have a mind and a body, and all my 6 senses come out. Oh, these 6 senses, when I get born into this world, I interact with the environment using these 6 senses. I gotta use them skillfully. When I see, when I hear, when I listen, when I touch, when I taste, when I smell, I gotta be pure. So these 6 senses get me into trouble. But can I turn these 6 senses into useful colleagues for me? Now, these are the colleagues working in the front end, the 6 senses. And they're doing all kinds of bad deeds for you. But can I turn them into this salesman doing good deeds for me? A fire is a bad master, but a very good servant. If you know how to use it. The water can float a boat, at the same time it can sink a boat. It depends how you use it. Maybe I should use my 6 senses skillfully and with prajna, with wisdom. And then you continue to say, oh, my 6 senses, in my mother's embryo comes up, I have 6 senses come up, the eye, nose, ear, and then I have contact. When I come out to the world, I have contact. When I have contact, I have feelings. I have pleasurable feelings, unpleasurable feelings, I have neutral feelings. Why do I have these feelings? When somebody hurt me, I want to repulse it, I want to object, I want to raise my complaint about it. Why do I have this feeling? And why do I have this craving for self-respect, for all these things? And why do I have this becoming and birth and aging and death? All these you can actually meditate on. The Pratyeka Buddha, before they become enlightened, they meditate on each of these 12 links of dependent origination. And then they work towards it using meditation.
The alaya conscious?
Alaya consciousness.
Does it come in at conception or at any time during gestation?
At inception?
Yeah.
I think you mean at the very beginning?
At conception.
At the inception, when you call inception, you call it at the very beginning. How does that arise? We call it consciousness, and calling it consciousness would automatically, habitually create a beginning conception. How does this come about? This come about because of cause and effect, because of causation. It creates out of causation. And if we use a beginning to define the time frame of it, then logically we encounter problems because in a beginning will have an end. So when we think of where does this consciousness come from? The consciousness comes from the mind. And this mind, when it is at peace, it won't have this consciousness. It's just like right now I have, my mind is without any polluted thinking. And then suddenly I think of something that polluted my mind. So you ask me, where does this unpolluted mind come from? It comes from just a moment ago. And a moment ago has another moment ago in the beginning. Has another moment ago in the beginning. So if you trace on a time frame using a dualistic approach of conceptual thinking, there's no beginning. We don't worry about the beginning. Why do you have to attach a beginning? Because if there is a beginning, by definition, there's an end, right? If there's an end, that means there's no causation. If there's an end, that means there's no effects after that end. So what happened at that end, at that particular ending year, you have done something really bad. That means there's no effect to that bad cause that you have cultivated. That means if there is a beginning, there's an end. It's illogical and it faces nihilism. It faces a contradiction of having no causation. Causation is a loop. And you're asking me, here is 12 links of dependent origination. You ask me, where does ignorance come from originally? Where does aging and death comes from originally? It comes from causation. We can only tell you it comes from causation. And if you really want to think further, I always bring about this further because when I'm answering your question, I'm still using I'm still, at a certain extent, still using the left side of my brain, which is on my logic, on what I have read and what I have experienced. And if I use the right side of my brain, which is from the spiritual side, maybe I said something you don't understand. Or maybe I haven't come up to that level as yet. So the Buddha said, only the Buddha, when enlightened, would have that question resolved. Otherwise, where does the egg come from? Where does the chicken, the hen come from? Chicken or egg? And the egg is hatched from the chicken, and where does the chicken come from? Chicken is from another egg, and another egg is from another chicken. Even the chicken-egg contradiction, you cannot solve in this life. Not to say Tathagata. Yes?
Metaphysics looks at the point of entry. When does alaya consciousness go into the embryo? And in metaphysics, they theorize it can happen at any time, even after the body is born. Alaya consciousness may not enter because the net of karma is still being laid. Mother and father, relations, all of that. Maybe the embryo was already in the mother, but their karmic relationship is still developing. There won't be a point of entry until a later moment.
It could be. or there could be a replacement.
Could be a replacement.
Yeah,
Everything changes.
yeah, maybe this sentient being is destined to be an embryo in that mom. Because being an embryo is like going to prison. You're captivated in there. Okay, so he is going through the suffering of captivation. Okay, boom, you get into there, and you stay there for two months. And then you get out again, and there's a new one coming in. It could be. So many things could happen beyond our imagination.
Only a Buddha would know.
Yeah, only the Buddha would know. It's just like a labyrinth of matters and the intricacies of it. Only the sane would know. It's just like when we're at kindergarten, and when those university graduates were talking about calculus, I don't know a word of what they say. What is infinity? Einstein's theory, E is equal to mc squared, I haven't a clue of what it means. But to him, he can explain it. He used his whole life to venture into the explanation of that. And human, we can only, because of our own wisdom, we can only go to a certain extent in our understanding.